So how does one get interested in these questions of intercultural dialogue? Let's start with my own experience. So I'm Austrian. But I did most of my studies in France. So I already had this bilingual experience. Just speaking one language and at the same time speaking another language. And little by little realizing that you cannot really translate everything just like this from one language into the other. And probably the problem of translation is even bigger in languages which are not related, like from Japanese to English. Right? It's even bigger words that you have to cross. So the question that appeared to me when I was quite young is, how does our language influence how do we see the world? We construct the world, we see it's there, but we also construct it. So if I see it through one language, or if I see it through another language, what kind of thing is that having as an impact? And so I was always interested in this construction. How do we construct realities individually, but also collectively with others? How do we live together? And that's how I became interested in law. Not so much because I wanted to become a lawyer or because I wanted to become a judge, but because I wanted to understand how society functions. So I went for law studies. And being in France, but having my German-speaking background, I kind of naturally moved to comparative law. And so I first started to do comparative law between France and Germany. So I did my first master actually it was business law, because I also wanted to have like economic analysis and legal analysis. And then comparative law between Germany and France. Now from Japan, these countries may seem very similar. You know, it's both have like a civil code, both, I mean, it's a very similar kind of system. But when you start to want to compare, I compared sales law in the French and in the German context, it's not so easy. One, because the whole thing is put up in a very different way. So what do you compare? You cannot just look, sales contract and what is the German word for sales. The whole codes are built up in a different way. But it's more than this. There's a whole underlying legal atmosphere, a whole legal culture, if you want, which is not the same. And so you start to ask yourself even, what am I comparing? You know, what is this law? You know, what is? So lots of questions actually started to emerge. And I also started to realize that many of the existing comparative scientists had lots of problems to think pluralism. Very often, either we thought, my system is the best, which I would call like a universalistic attitude. The German should learn what we have, you know, a beautiful French civil code. The German would say, oh, French civil code, that was 100 years before, you know. Ours is much more perfect, they should perfect theirs. So it's this universalistic point of view. Try thinking that you're the best and maybe the others should learn from you. Second one is a relativistic point of view. Oh, everything is perfect, just let everybody with their own thing, you know, but don't interfere, don't mingle these things, you know, everybody let them do their own thing. And then you have a third thing, which was a syncretic attitude. Let's take the best from everywhere and make a new system. What's the problem with this? Well, even if you do that, you still reduce it to a new system. So again, you have this unity which is there. But how to think the pluralism of coexisting different systems and how to articulate those things? So that was the questions that started to come very strongly for me. And also the question of pragmatism. I don't know, do we have some law students here also come from a law background? Oh, no law students. Well, if you were law students, oh, one hidden law student. So, when you learn about law, sometimes we have our codes and all these things. But talk about it with normal people, they don't at all have all this legal knowledge. They may think that things work in a very different way from what is actually like in the text and in the books. So how to go beyond that gap, how to have a more pragmatic, less idealistic maybe also point of view. So these were two questions which were there. And which led me, after completing my master, so I had lived also in Austria, in Romania, in France and Germany at that time. And then I had this opportunity to go to India for 1 year, to actually study international relations, but more specifically international law. So when I moved there, it was like beginning of the 90s. India was not yet an open market. And they were just on the edge. They were just deciding, should we open up, should we not open up? Also at that time, neither India nor China were big players in the sense like they are now, very present. And so I was shocked by especially two things. First thing, I became aware that the international law is very much Western law. And I also became aware that even in the contemporary system, this law is very much applied like the big powers want it to be applied. So I was feeling, where is the voice of such a big nation as India? Even not only like demographic, but political, the history, all these things. We don't give a real voice. So I felt that something is, there's not enough intercultural dialogue on the global sphere. Second thing, I started to realize that if you look at the daily life in India, they have imported the British legal system, which they have then Indianized when they became independent, but still it's an imported system. Now, lots of the legal reality of people is not this legal system. It's what we can call for the moment, there's problems with these words, but I just use it for the moment, but you can call it traditional law or custom or this kind of things. And maybe 80% of the legal reality is not the official state reality. So again, you have like a huge part of the population which is excluded from its own law, so in a certain way from its own society. So this was really a big shock for me. I was like, what world are we living in? You know, where we have like these norms and stuff, many people are excluded. So how to think law in a more participatory way? How to approach things in such a way that well, all these different worldviews, all these things are actually taken into account. And up to that point, I always loved to read sociology, anthropology, but I never really felt like studying it. And in JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University in India, I met an anthropology professor, little by little started to teach me a bit more. And also I was deepening my knowledge of India. And then I was thinking, maybe one should bring law and anthropology together. What is law? Law is about organizing society. It's a top-down approach. And it's a very prescriptive approach. What you learn as a lawyer is not really so much to understand, but how to fit whatever happens into your little boxes, so that you can deal with them. Basically, that's what it's doing. Anthropology, on the other hand, is more like a bottom-up approach, which starts with what the actors are doing, what the actors are perceiving. It wants to be more descriptive. It's not so much concerned about what are we going to do with it. You don't have to solve any conflict. So just see, that's what is happening. That's what is there. You don't even use your modern law. They function with other, even words. You don't maybe have a word for law or something like this. So I was thinking, maybe if I can take these insights from anthropology and I try to put that together with law, then maybe we can move to a more intercultural, more holistic approach. And so at the beginning I thought like I may have to start to study anthropology from scratch and then do my own thing. And then I found out that actually, maybe you didn't know before, or maybe some knew. I would be interested. How many of you didn't know that anthropology of law exists? 2 persons? 3? Oh, wow. So you have heard about it.
Know?
Hmm?
We didn't know if it existed.
Did you know?
Oh, no.
You didn't? See? So same thing for me. I didn't know that something like this could exist. But I was very happy to find, you know, that actually there was something like this. So I didn't have to start from scratch. And also there was like another master, which actually because of the French colonial past was linked to African studies. And in African studies they had political science, law, economics, and one thing was called Anthropology of Law and Power. So I registered for this. And there, it was very much about contemporary problems. Again, you know, you have to do things very shortly. And maybe sometimes when you think anthropology, you think, oh, some very far away, remote little village somewhere, not touched by modernity or something like this. What were the people working on in my lab? They were working on land law issues in Africa, access to justice, problem of dealing with cultural diversity in France, like in front of the judges. So very, very concrete and also very political questions, actually. So I was like, oh wow, wonderful. It seemed to be in the right place. And I registered there, so I came home from India, it was like in 95, and so it was 95, 96 that I did my master's in Anthropology of Law. And so just 2 years before there was a big conference that you may have heard about. It was in 1993 conference on human rights in Vienna. And there had been quite some criticisms during that conference that human rights is a Western thing. It's not universal, it's just it's a Western thing. And of course, some of that claims may have been because of political reasons also. But is it only this? Is there not that maybe, let's have a second look. If already what I have perceived that, for example, German law, French law is not the same than it was in India, completely different kind of world. Well, what about it? And if there is some truth in it, is it true that the only choice you have is to be either universalistic or relativistic? You know, you cannot be both at the same time. Or is there a way, instead of thinking in terms of contradiction of differences, to think in complementarity of differences? Again, this question, is it possible to approach things in a pluralist way? And second thing is, okay, universalism is nice. Now we talked about the ideal part of it, but in practice, we have all these conventions and declarations, and it's in the constitutions. Does it work? Does it work? When you go to the grassroots levels, does it work? And there again, I'm not saying it does not work at all, but it doesn't really work so universally as it's supposed to work. So how do we, again, bridge this gap between theories, declarations, and practice? So again, this pragmatic kind of challenge was there. And so I decided to write my master thesis on that topic. And when I was doing it, I was not completely aware of what I was doing, but I realized that if I want to rethink human rights in a more intercultural way, you have to rethink law. Because human rights depend on law. And then you start to realize if you want to rethink law, you have to understand and rethink the underlying modern world vision. And when I started my work, we call it laboratoire d'Anthropologie Juridique de Paris. Laboratoire is like laboratory, but it's like a center. And so when we went to the secretariat, there was always like some yellow, big advertisings for the European Academy of Legal Theory. And whenever I was walking next to this, I would say, oh, it will be a master program, and there will be courses in semiotics of law, and philosophy of law, and theory of comparative law, economic analysis of law, and all these things. And I just remembered, like, the first 2 or 3 months I was walking next to them, there are crazy people in this world. I was just doing my thing. And the more I started to work on my thesis, master thesis, I was like, oh, maybe I should go there. Because I have to understand this, what law is about. To be able to criticize it so that you can propose something else. But also, how can you have an intercultural dialogue if you don't know your culture? So I felt I also must know what my European tradition has to say about law. And so after my year in France, I moved to Belgium and did this master's in legal theory. And then came back and did my Ph.D. actually on this question of human rights and intercultural dialogue. So you see, what I tried to do here, we talked already about quite some concepts, but I wanted to link them like with a personal testimony, so that you see that concepts are not just things which are, oh, now I learned this concept and that concept, and how can I apply this concept? It's existential questions. You have a problem. And then you're like, how am I going to answer this problem? So you go somewhere, you get something. Oh, but there's still this other problem. So you have to find some other tools which help you. And that is how, in a certain way, you have to become interdisciplinary. Because your discipline is too small for like bigger questions. For some things, it's very useful to just have like one approach, and you can deepen things inside of that framework. But if you want to ask new questions, or if you want to invent new things, then very often it's necessary that you go out of these boundaries. Because in the world, the boundaries don't exist. The boundaries have been created by people who try to approach it in a certain way. And so then, little by little, So this whole work on human rights and intercultural dialogue became work on, because now I finished my thesis in 2000, and so things had started to change. And the big question, I'm not saying that human rights was absent, but in the international discourses what became more and more important is good governance and sustainable development. And so there the main point was not so much universal versus relative, but it was more the global and the local. It was all about participation. Everybody has to participate. Development programs have to be participatory. Everything has to be participatory. So little by little, the global discourse in a certain way became more, we'll talk about this in our third movement, it became more open to this kind of anthropological ideas. Because it started to open up the doors to, oh, participate, but participate means I have to know what the different actors are saying, huh? Because we have to articulate those different logics. Also, it's more easy to think of articulating the global in the local, because that's what we always see. Huh? We have the effects of the global in the local, of the local in the global, and so on. So it's easier in a certain way to do that than when you think about universalism and relativism. You know, there you don't see that it's also a relationship. And so then for like almost 15 years, I worked very much on questions of law governance and sustainable development. So my own work, and I organized some international dynamics of research on that topic. So always with people from all over the world and from all disciplines. And with the main two questions, how to live together in a responsible way, because that's what it is about, and how to do so by having a dialogue, not imposing one worldview over the others. So that is a little the general frame.